Time now for Back Pages tonight here on Sky Sports News, bringing you a first look at the sports stories in the morning's newspapers. And joining us tonight, the Independent's chief football writer Miguel Delaney and the Sun's football editor Charlie Wyett. Welcome to you both. Let's quickly run through the back pages. The front page of the Mirror this time, the new Kaiser chief Thomas Tuchel with Stein in hand pictured there. The Mirror back page, same story, it's Tuchel. While above that, United axe Fergie. The Mail calls the Tuchel appointment a dark day for England. Tuchel's £5 million a year England mega deal, they report. The Times simply has the headline, Tuchel to manage England. Guardian has Tuchel time, and City to target Rúben Amorim if Guardiola exits in the summer. Telegraph Sport front page, Tuchel, new manager of England. And the Sun back page says he's a great lederhosen. We'll come to you, Charlie, with the front page of the Mirror then, indicative of how big a story it is, I suppose. But the Kaiser chief, reference, of course, to being German, I suppose. How big a deal is this? Thomas Tuchel would have grown up rejoicing at England being knocked out of big tournaments. Is that going to be a problem?
It's a massive story, isn't it? Huge deal. And maybe it's written in the stars that England are going to finally win their first trophy since the World Cup in 1966 with a German in charge. Obviously, third overseas manager. It's been a pretty crazy week. 6 days ago, we were just speaking at a press conference ahead of the game, against Greece, thinking Lee Carsley, it was all there for him. And less than a week later, we're talking about Thomas Tuchel, a huge character. It's a fascinating appointment. I can understand why some people feel they'd like to see an Englishman in charge, but I totally understand why the FA have gone for him.
Well, in the Independent, Sir Miguel Delaney's written a piece in reaction to it. England's statement signing of Thomas Tuchel showed as much desperation as inspiration. It's a very good read, Miguel, not biased because you're on tonight. But desperation, you say, stems from the fact that England don't have too many options, which is probably an indictment on a so-called big footballing nation.
Well, that's exactly it. And also maybe the sense that obviously England have gone so close under Southgate, but they are also the biggest country and the only World Cup winning country to go on a drought this long. It's actually unprecedented in football history. And it does just feel, especially given the FA have obviously rightfully made such a virtue of the overhaul of the country's football culture and identity over the last decade, everything that St George's Park represents, England DNA, all of that. But to suddenly go from that almost kind of long-term approach to just as they get to that final detail, to almost kind of depart from that and bring in a foreign... I suppose it's more in keeping with the culture of the Premier League, really, than what the FA have been over the past decade. And I think it's absolutely key to stress here. This has nothing to do with nationality, and I wouldn't think Tuchel being German is part of that. It's more just, I suppose, what it says about English football culture right now. And I suppose that maybe the paucity of coaches that would be considered, especially given that such a key to this whole cultural overhaul has been to create a pathway for coaches. And I suppose at the least think that's an interesting discussion to have, as well as what maybe international football is supposed to represent in that sense. Certainly for the major countries and massive populations that do have more resources than most.
Yep, hard to imagine Germany courting an England coach at the moment, but that perhaps says something about where English coaches are currently. Charlie, let's go to the Sun back page. He's a great lederhosen as the headline. Kane backs a quote-unquote fantastic Tuchel as England boss. And he has got a big connection, hasn't he, with the England captain and several other Englishmen from his Chelsea days. How significant is that, Charlie?
Well, I think Mason Mount particularly will be happy because he's had a tough few months, hasn't he? With Manchester United and obviously out of the picture with England. But Eric Dyer, of course, played really well last season. I think they were surprised, the fans at Bayern, when he was brought over to the Bundesliga, but he played well for Tuchel. And of course, Harry Kane, who scored one goal every 89 minutes for Bayern under Tuchel, 44 goals in 45 games. That's the best record Kane has ever had for a manager. And quite clearly that interview, that clip you showed earlier with Harry Kane, he knew Thomas Tuchel was going to be his manager of England, didn't he? I think there was a little smile there where he's asked the question. So he'll be happy. But I think, we're going to see a big change with the England team. There's no doubt about that. The style of play, I think, will be different as well. But just going back to your point about a German taking charge, I think that the FA, maybe the top choice would have been Eddie Howe, but I think there's financial issues to come into play here as well. And he would have cost, I don't think the FA would have been able to get him out of Newcastle. I think he's going to be a terrific manager. He is a terrific manager, will be a great manager one day for England. But I don't think the FA could have even sort of really thought about the compensation that Newcastle would have demanded. And of course, Thomas Tuchel, he comes here, he's going to start on January the 1st. There's no compensation to pay there. So I think that probably, has played a small part in the recruitment that, of course, managers like Guardiola at the moment, maybe in the future without the question. Jurgen Klopp was obviously a no-go as well. So I think there were limitations for the FA, and equally there are some managers coming through, like Kieran McKenna or Nyland Russell-Martin, but they're not quite ready yet. And the other sort of real difficult factor, of course, it's not just the Premier League where English managers don't get much of a chance. They're not getting their chances in the Championship as well. So that doesn't help the FA moving forward over the next few years.
Tuchel available, wasn't he? A Champions League winning coach, great credentials, but the Mail says, Sir Miguel, a dark day for England. 3 lines gamble on a German in capital letters, but Tuchel only has 18 months to prove he's up to it. And the top of that column there, it's a comment from Mail Sport. International football should be the best of ours versus the best of theirs. Do you think it would be problematic at all to the players, Miguel, having a man from a rival nation coming into the dressing room?
No, I don't think so, especially given he knows so many of them through either managing Chelsea players or playing against them for Chelsea and even at Bayern Munich. Charlie's reference there, Harry Kane, who he has a great relationship with. I don't think that'll be an issue. I think what's most important to players is the stature of the manager. I do agree with the Mail editorial on maybe the idea of international football, certainly for the big nations. I think that's an interesting discussion to have. I don't necessarily think it's a dark day. And I suppose, because really, what's going to decide this is basically whether he wins the World Cup or not. And if he wins the World Cup, well, a lot of these arguments are basically just noise. That's what it does come down to. And I suppose this is the kind of wider perspective for the FA. It's about, after 12 years of build-up now, finally bringing this era through fruition, even if it does need a bit of outside help. And I think that is worth pointing to as well. Charlie's mentioned Klopp and Guardiola, who basically, I suppose, would have been the top picks. But if you can't get that, or that level of manager, Tuchel is essentially the next best. That's the level he's been considered at over the past few years. Beat Guardiola to 2021 Champions League. And I think there's a fair argument that actually, by the time 2026 comes around, he will probably be the best manager and most adept coach at the World Cup. Maybe up there, maybe Pochettino up there with him as well.
Maybe Nagelsmann as well. We'll see how that goes. Surely,
Nagelsmann.
Sure, England will come head-to-head with Germany at some point. It's almost written in the stars. And then what do you make of that, though, Charlie? Dark day, the headline there. How do you compare and contrast it to the Sven-Göran Eriksson and Fabio Capello appointments back in the day?
I don't think it's a dark day. I can understand why some people are frustrated. I can understand why British coaches are frustrated. I really can. People who work within the FA setup, and it is it's a brilliant operation at St George's Park, and obviously Gareth Southgate helped change so many things over his 8 years. But equally, I think the FA would have loved to have given it to Lee Carsley. Quite clearly, that wasn't quite going to work. So the FA have had to move. They've moved quickly, and they've got an experienced manager, as we all know, and someone that's going to be interesting. It's not going to be dull. This is the thing. It's going to be, at times I think it's going to be a bumpy road. It's never been particularly smooth with Tuchel. Looking at all his clubs, he's fallen out with players. He's fallen out with hierarchy at most of the clubs that he's managed. I think it's going to be lively. It's not ideal that it doesn't look as though he's going to be around for these next 2 games. So he's not going to be taking charge till January. And of course, England's next games after that will be in March. And it could even be some Nations League playoffs. And then we're into the the World Cup qualifiers. So it's definitely not ideal because the World Cup really isn't that far away.
No, we'll get on the length of contract as well in just a second. But Miguel, what's your take on the Lee Carsley situation? Of course, technically you would have been an overseas coach, albeit with a Brummie accent. But do you think if he'd won both games in the previous break, he would have got the job?
From what we've found out today in the last few days, it doesn't actually seem like it. Because, I mean, I suppose the immediate thought now is that the Greek game maybe cost him his job. But from what we've heard, obviously overtures are made to Tuchel long before that. It ramped up in the last week. And I think maybe this more explains what had been considered Carsley's maybe contradictory and confusing comments over the past few days, in that they suddenly now sound like a man who was trying to keep a secret rather than one who wouldn't commit to the job.
Yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it? The world-class coach certainly coming to the fore. He's got an 18-month contract. Look at the Telegraph Sport. Tuchel, new manager of England, to take over on January the 1st on an initial 18-month contract, writes Matt Law. Decision to appoint foreign coach likely to spark debate. We've touched upon that. Anyone else, you think 18 months would be a bit frugal, wouldn't you, Charlie? But it's the perfect fit for Tuchel, isn't it? This is how he likes to operate this time frame. He's a sprinter.
Absolutely. His last contract at Bayern was just over 2 years, and he wasn't there for any longer than that. And he generally isn't, is it? And I don't think it really matters. It's quite refreshing that clearly Tuchel didn't want longer than an 18-month contract. It doesn't work for the FA either. Let's see what happens at the World Cup. So, yeah, he's on, £5 million a year. So that's a big wage, slightly less than Gareth Southgate. But again, that's just an average wage in terms of the Premier League now. So it just shows you that financially, the FA simply cannot compete and look for the names that people sort of in this sort of fantasy management that people would like to sign in terms of Klopp and Guardiola. So £5 million a year is a decent amount, but of course there's bonuses built in there, and I imagine there'll be huge bonuses as well. Yeah,
indeed. Tuchel to manage England. Back page of the Times Sport. Former Chelsea coach will be first German in charge of national team. Is it a compliment, I suppose, to England that Tuchel's taking it when perhaps he could have got more money elsewhere? Miguel, I know your piece referenced the Manchester United situation.
Yeah, well, as a few people mentioned to me today, the World Cup could be a bit of a kind of an array of managers that could have been the Manchester United manager, including Pochettino, and if they've kind of potentially let the right man go. But it's not a Manchester United story. I do think that, that was a deal that came close to being done in the summer. There's a few a few conflicting details about why it didn't happen. I don't think it didn't happen for football reasons. I don't think football reasons was the reason it didn't happen. I think had United acted on Ten Hag this week, everything we'd heard was that Tuchel was a top choice to come in. And it's hard not to wonder whether this situation accelerated specifically over the last week because it became clear that United weren't actually going to move on Ten Hag in the way a lot of people expected. It does also speak to Tuchel's status. And as Charlie's referenced there, ultimately, this is the reality of the modern game now. The top coach, by far, more of the money is in the club game. Also, I suppose that's where coaches now feel the most relevance. Apart from that month every 2 years when a major tournament comes around, and particularly the World Cup. And actually, I wonder, it's something I've been told it's potentially another element for this, which maybe worked against a coach like Carsley in this sense, that because this World Cup is mostly in the USA, it's also in Canada and Mexico, well, they're expecting it to be commercially the most lucrative World Cup of all time. We're talking about $11 billion, which would be $4 billion more than Qatar. And any federation with a kind of a modern commercial outlook in that sense, well, it suits more to have a box office manager spearheading your team, especially someone like Tuchel, who, he is able to speak well.
He is very well, and not his first language as well. Very impressive. And if he leads England to the World Cup, he'll be revered for centuries to come, won't he? OK, we'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll look at more of the morning's newspapers, including this in The Guardian. Tuchel time there, but also City to target Amorim if Guardiola exits in summer. More on that to come. Welcome back. You're watching Back Pages tonight, and it's welcome back to the Independent's chief football writer Miguel Delaney and the Sun's football editor Charlie Wyett. Let's go to the Guardian's Sport then. We'll get to the Manchester City story in just a second, we teased before the break. But first, the Thomas Tuchel story there. Tuchel time. German agrees deal to be England's new manager. Miguel, in here in the piece by David Heitner, it says Tuchel is uncompromising, left his previous 4 jobs amid something of a cloud, reports of fallings out with players and directors following his exits. How potentially incendiary could his relationship be with the FA? Do you see combustions to come?
Well, it's a funny one, that I suppose. I mean, the main thing to say is there are no transfers involved in European football. So that's one area which has been a major source of contention in his career, where he can't fall out with anyone. So there's no recruitment issues. It's not like, say, the situation of PSG, where he can have a disagreement with the technical director of football because they have a different idea on the sort of players they're signing. That said, as someone humorous put to me tonight, the FA, I suppose, currently has a consultancy culture, or at least a lot of consultants. And it's maybe interesting how Tuchel is going to manage up in that sense. Obviously, that's something that Southgate was very good at. I mean, I do think, just with the nature of the FA job, how a coach is so well looked after, that shouldn't be an issue. But as you pointed it there, Tuchel is a particular character and not afraid to speak his mind when he needs it.
No, it's been very interesting for you guys in the press pack and those press conferences and Sky Sports News, Rob Dorset as well. Let's talk Manchester City, Charlie. I'll come to you. The piece by Jacob Steinberg there in The Guardian. City to target Rúben Amorim if Guardiola exits in the summer. How good a fit could that be? How likely do you see that as happening?
Well, you know, he's a huge ally of Hugo Viana, who is going to join from Sporting to City as their sporting director in the summer. You can see why City are having to put together a plan, but because Guardiola, you know, continues to be pretty vague, doesn't he, on his future, saying, you know, anything can happen. I still think there's a chance that he will stay, Guardiola, for at least one more season. But City don't know that, so Amorim could be an obvious choice. Was close at one stage, it seemed, to coming to the Premier League for West Ham. But yeah, the Viana going to City, I think, changes things a bit. But equally, you can see why Manchester City ultimately just be desperate to keep hold of Pep Guardiola for just one more season. Yeah,
huge act to follow, isn't it, after 8+ years. Miguel, what's your take on Rúben Amorim? I think he was linked to Liverpool previously as well. Could he be the man, if anyone is, to follow Pep Guardiola?
Yeah, I mean, again, before Arne Slot, he was considered by Liverpool quite close to Slot, actually. In fact, around February or March, people actually thought that would maybe be the more likely appointment. So he has that pedigree. A lot of top clubs like him. He would kind of, I suppose, be a continuation, but also maybe just a kind of, not necessarily an evolution, but you bring it on from Guardiola in something slightly different tactically. Of course, weighing over this is the hearing as well. I mean, City obviously absolutely protest their innocence, so they will continue with business as usual. But depending on how that goes, it could change everything. But for the moment, yeah, obviously Amorim is, just because of how he's seen in the game, he's a very obvious choice to potentially succeed Guardiola, especially, as Charlie said there, with someone close to him like Viana in charge.
Yeah, big challenge to keep Manchester City at the top of the game. Manchester United still trying to get back there. Let's talk about them, Charlie. In the Mirror top there, you can see David McDonald's story. United axe Fergie. Sir Alex Ferguson has become the most high-profile victim of the brutal cost-cutting measures at Manchester United. In the Telegraph, though, Jim White even writes that Fergie time is over and Ratcliffe has made the right call. The gist of Jim White's piece, Charlie, is that in a time of austerity at United, where Christmas parties, etc., people are losing their jobs, this is the right call. But surely Manchester United wouldn't be making £600 million a year if it wasn't for Sir Alex Ferguson. They should pay him till his final day, shouldn't they?
No, I agree with Jim. And Eric Cantona has really gone ballistic at United. But I think, yeah, as you've just mentioned there, at a time where United are cost-cutting, a lot of people have lost their jobs in Manchester. And the fact that Fergie was still being paid over £2 million a year to be an ambassador, I actually think it's crazy. Of course he's going to be welcome there for the rest, for the rest of his life. That goes without saying. But I think £2 million was a lot of money, even though they're obviously eternally grateful for what he brought to that club. I do see why United have done that.
What do you think, Miguel? Would they be making anywhere near the kind of money they are now if it wasn't for Ferguson, what he did?
No, I mean, he is the modern club in that sense. He's a legacy. In cold terms, I'd say it's probably, it's the correct decision. There are other issues here, like I suppose the weight that a club like that feels when you have such a legendary figure around for so long. The one point I would make in tempering that, I suppose, it's as both of you said there, I suppose, it's the amount of money United actually make. So it is quite remarkable that they're in that situation. And I suppose that speaks to something bigger and maybe more kind of, it's almost a bigger debate, which is, I suppose, the economic outlook of the ownership on both sides. Where should there really be this sort of need for austerity at United?
Yeah, what do you think, Charlie? Do you see brighter days ahead for Manchester United once they've worked out how to balance the books? Is that an important first step?
Yeah, I do. Within a couple of years, I think the setup that they've got there now, and of course, I think they had to cut costs. I think with Dan Ashworth and the team they've got there on the sporting side, they will get it right. Short term, I don't think Erik ten Hag will be the man, but in 2 or 3 years' time, and particularly with the stadium to come, we assume as well, I think United will be in really good shape.
I remember Sir Alex Ferguson talking about being quite inspired and helped by Sir Matt Busby. I think you'd hear cigars or smell cigar smoke emanating from his office, Miguel. What do you think of Erik ten Hag's position, though? You've got about 30, 40 seconds. Do you feel that for ten Hag and future Manchester United manager, it helps maybe that Sir Alex isn't around?
I think maybe it's got to the point now where, certainly for Ten Hag's situation, that isn't so relevant. It is still a kind of not necessarily a shadow, but a weight over the club. And really at this point, though, Ten Hag's issues are injuries notwithstanding, recruitment issues notwithstanding, but they are of his own making. You can see it in tactics. And I have to say, I'm still slightly surprised he's going to be taking the job this weekend. But that does speak, I think, to the hierarchy's current outlook, which is the preference is to keep him unless it gets really, really serious. Although it doesn't feel like we're that far off that at the moment. Yeah,
and alternatives getting fewer by the day, it seems. Thomas Tuchel going to England. Charlie and Miguel, thank you very much for your time tonight on Back Pages Tonight. Hope to see you soon. Great chat. And if you missed any of the show, another chance to see Back Pages Tonight at hour. Remember, the show is also available as a podcast. Just download Back Pages on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And join us again on Wednesday night. Our guests will be Ian Lederman from the Daily Mail and Martin Hardy from The Times.